Good evening, everybody. This is Kiron Talks again with our usual hosts, Dominic Orr and Sabrina Konzog from Kiron, Open Higher Education, and our special guest, Eleanor Sarpong. She is with us today, apparently from the UK, and she's the Deputy Director of the Alliance for Affordable Internet, an organization that is dealing with the question, how do we get internet, how does internet come actually to the homes? How much does it cost, and where are the political problems here? So, Eleanor, welcome. How do you do?
How do you do too, Tino?
Man, do you think the internet that we have is available for everyone so easily?
Well, unfortunately not. There are some countries, some places, in fact, within countries, even there's such inequality as well. We see inequalities across regions as well between, say, Europe, America, Africa, and Asia. We also see inequalities within countries, within places where people have wealth and people don't have wealth. We see inequalities even across gender. Between how men use the internet and in some places women as well, and so it's very uneven, and there are different reasons for that as well. But generally,
so your work actually with the Alliance for Affordable Internet. What does the Alliance and you are doing exactly? To are you counseling? What is your role? How does it work?
So the Alliance for Affordable Internet is the leading advocate for affordable internet around the world. And we are an initiative of the World Wide Web Foundation. The World Wide Web Foundation is the foundation that was set up by the inventor of the World Wide Web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. It's because of him that we can see each other today. And Sir Tim has a vision where he set up the web and gave it out for free because he wanted everybody to be connected, to be able to see the full potential of the web. Sadly, that's not what's happening today. And so for us, we've seen that in a lot of countries, people are still very much behind. 50% of the world is not connected, by the way. And so if you just look at that, that's over 3.5 billion people. And so we really we need to speed up the connectivity to make sure that by 2030, which is the UN goal, everybody is connected. So for us at the Alliance, we focus on two areas, on policy and regulatory reform, because we've seen that these are the places where we have an entry to be able to make the change that we want to see. And we work with governments, we work through a coalition, government, civil society, and private sector. We form national coalitions, we do a lot of research. So if we come to you and we're speaking, it's grounded on research, evidence-based advocacy. That's how we're able to get the change that we want to see. And so that is the focus for us. And at the Alliance, and that's what we've been doing for the past, we're going to be 7 years in October, so we're a very young organization, but yes, we've been punching above our weight, and we've been doing quite a lot of work. And I must also mention that one of the key factors, one of the key standards that we developed is called the 1 for 2 affordability standard, which is that you shouldn't spend more than 2% of your average monthly income on 1 gigabit of data. So if you're spending more than 2%, like in some countries, people are spending up to 8% of the average monthly income, which is equivalent to what somebody is spending on housing or utilities, then you realize that the internet is very unaffordable for some people. So the 1 for 2, we came up with it, and through our advocacy, the UN Broadband Commission has taken it up, and now all countries have the standard and they work towards it. And we do measure the progress that countries are making towards the standard. And we try to advise them on how they could go about trying to bring down the cost of internet and make it affordable. So it's not just about the cost, but making sure that it's cost relative to the income. Make sure that people can afford the internet.
I have to say, this is also how I got in contact with Eleanor, because last autumn I actually was using some of this data because I was looking for something that would help us understand the different prices in the different mobile markets. And there was a lot of data which was literally simply the price, kind of the net price, and it really wasn't that useful. And it's very, very useful to see it in relation to, as you say, people's standard income. And I actually did a small quiz with my colleagues 2 weeks ago where we were trying to guess which were the most expensive and the cheapest countries. And it's fascinating to look at that data. And as you say, on the one hand, I mean, I myself was in Niger last autumn, and a lot of the people I talked to were using smartphones. And now I found from your data that in Niger, I think the standard cost for 1 gigabyte is about 10% of the average income.
Yeah.
And this is really such an insightful data set because, of course, when I was there, I was, of course, talking to people who, for them, it wasn't this 10%, but it gave me kind of a false feeling for what is normal in the country. So it's very, very useful. And there's some very, very surprising statistics there. If I remember rightly, the costs for India were amazingly low.
Yes.
But I read another, I just mentioned two things because I'm very much a fan of all your work. I read another report which came out today, which was to do with yesterday, the cost of buying a smartphone. And the interesting thing was in India, if I remember rightly now, compared to the Niger, in India, the average cost based on of connectivity was something like 0.2% of the average wage. But then if you look at the cost of a smartphone, I think people, I forget the figure for India now, but it was something like people have to work for 2 months before they can afford a smartphone. So they had no other, just the total sum they would earn over those 2 months, they would need it to buy a smartphone. So we can see connectivity is a huge issue.
Yeah, and affordability. Actually, so I'm glad you mentioned our latest research, which is about smartphone affordability, because if you think India is bad, you should look at Sierra Leone. You have to work for 6 months before you can afford a smartphone. So it's very different to look up just a price. What's the price? Because we always tell people don't ask what's the price. You should ask what's the price relative to how much people are earning, because then that's when you're able to know whether they can afford it or not. So that's why we are very focused on affordability, device affordability, and internet affordability as well. So I think that you had mentioned you wanted me to talk about why the internet is expensive and how does it get to people's homes.
Yeah, very much.
And I wanted to go back to one of our research that we did, I believe 2 years ago, which looked at the various components of the internet. So I'm sitting here in the UK. You are obviously in mainland Europe. So if I wanted to, I mean, as we speak to you now, I'm just looking at it practically, the internet has to go through a subsea cable underneath the sea to land on the shore of either one of the countries. So it could be Belgium, it could be France, and then it travels across the continent, gets to the border of whichever country. So it would be Germany in this case, and then from there it's taken to a particular hub, and then from there it's then distributed, and the distribution that gets to your doorstep. So that there's what we call the first mile, which is when it lands on the continent. And so that's the subsea cable landing on the continent. And then the middle mile is when it travels across, various countries on the ground. And it could also travel, mainly through to the hub. And then the last mile is how it's distributed into, so it's the capillaries, how it gets to people's doorsteps. Now, what our research show is that in each of these stages, it can be quite expensive, particularly the first stage and then the last stage. And so you need investment, you need the right policies and regulations to be able to ensure that the investments are protected. And then you also need to ensure that there is the demand. So that's the other thing. So if you put in all this investment, how are you going to recoup your money? And so for governments and most of this is done by private sector. In some cases, private sector will partner the government in what we call the public-private partnerships. Now, in cases where the private sector is let alone to do it, they'll just prioritize say Munich, Frankfurt, Berlin, the capital towns where they know they can make their money back. But otherwise, they will just leave the fringes or places where you have small populations or where the geography is just too difficult, like a mountainous area. It's going to cost them far too much money. Or where the people are just poor in a rural area, they're not going to bother about those places. So in such a case, the government will have to step in. And that is where good policies can help to either create incentives, or government can put its own money into the space so that you can be able to get connectivity to people who are less fortunate or marginalized, or some of your students as well.
So the majority of information, the majority of information goes through cables. And what role do satellites have here?
So satellites are also another form of connectivity. The cheapest form of, so satellites can do the last mile. So for instance, connecting from the hub to the last mile to get to your homes. You can use satellites in places where it's very difficult to go through to go through the land. So in a very mountainous area, for instance, or in a place that has, to say, a lot of marshy, where it's very difficult to lay a cable either through by aerial, or you find out that satellites tend to be better used in those cases. So there are different forms of getting connectivity, but typically the cables tend to be faster, more stable, and tend to be, well, I wouldn't talk about as for the being cheaper. It's always a very contentious issue because it depends on the operators. But satellites are very important as well. But we do find out that yes, cables tend to provide a lot more of these supporting a very stable internet.
What I would be interested in, because very often if you talk about, for example, African countries, right? For most people who have not been there, it's very hard to relate. And then they think, okay, well, the connectivity is so low, obviously it's bad. And then I always bring the case of the Black Forest in Germany, where I'm actually from. And people always laugh in the first case because it's Germany, right? And it seems to be more developed. But if I go back home, there are so many villages where you have zero connection, even just on your phone, not even talking about internet, you don't even have connection to make a call. And also the connection of the internet is very weak. So what does it take to improve policy, right? To go the last mile if even, countries like Germany seem to not manage well enough?
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about Germany and other countries, because, when I talked about the fact that even within certain countries, you tend to have poor connectivity in places. This is where having good disaggregated data is very important. Because otherwise you're just going to assume that, oh, it's Germany and people are connected, so everybody is connected. But when you start disaggregating the data, like you just mentioned, your hometown, you talk about, how the connectivity is poor. If you have that data, then you can take it to policymakers and explain that, look, these places are not connected, so make sure that it's covered in your DEX statistics or investments. Maybe you should give some kind of incentive to companies, or just give specific companies. Now we have small complementary service providers who do community services, community innovations, community networks. And you could probably give them licenses so that they can set up there. It can serve just the people within the radius. Even communities themselves can actually get the equipment to set up. Sometimes they cost as less as $10,000 to set up such a network. But if you don't have that data, and often countries are not doing the disaggregation of the data, and that is where we have a problem. So that's one of the issues we've been really advocating for. Make sure you disaggregate the data so that you don't just say that everybody's connected. Like we've just seen, COVID has really shown us how bad it is. For instance, in developed countries, you look at the US, there are many people in towns in the US who cannot do homeschooling, who cannot work from home because they don't have access to the internet. And you're talking about developed countries. So I think that often we have masking or bundling up the data is one of the problems that we've seen. And so we're always pushing for disaggregation of data. If you get that chance, please ask. If say everyone is connected, say how many people are connected here. how many people are connected in this town? And you should also ask how many men, how many women. It's very important. Yeah.
The point of disaggregated data, is that something to do with the telecommunication providers? That because I suppose they would tend to have that data. I mean, not by, well, yeah, maybe even by gender as well.
It's possible. It depends on what the policy of the country is, or what the regulations.
Right.
Because I know telecom companies have to be reporting to the regulator, so they do report what's their monthly subscriber, the number of subscribers they have. They also report on coverage and other areas. But sometimes I think it's all lumped up. Nobody really checks. So if it's coverage, I'll give you an example. I was working in a country where in a developing country at one point, and what the requirements of the license said, you should have a presence in a town, in every district in the country. There were 230 districts. So what do? They just take make sure they get connectivity to one major pole or in a town, and then they'll tick the box. We have connected the town. But we all know that the town has so many other small settlements who are not connected. But then they'll tell you the license requirement says connect a town. And so we've connected a town. And so you need to start asking, when you start asking, so how many people does this cover? How many people are connected? And then follow up and check how many people are really connected in the town. And that's when you realize that that connectivity is just useless. It's just a presence. And even the quality is another issue. That's one issue we've been seeing, that having basic access is just not enough. It has to be meaningful connectivity. It has to be able to give people the chance to be able to say, do say a video call like this, be able to access relevant content from the internet, be able to connect every day, not just connect today and maybe wait another week because there's poor connectivity. That for us is not meaningful connectivity. So that's why we've just raised the bar this year when we launched a meaningful connectivity standard. And the point is, we want to say, look, it's not enough to have basic connectivity. It's not just enough to have access. It has to be at least a 4G type, so that you can have at least 10 download of 10 megabits per second. And then also you should be able to connect every day. And then also it should be unlimited, because when you have a chance where people's it's just tied to the gigabit of data, then every time it's just running there. You don't even have any, when you have a video call, like, oh, you know what, let me just switch off because my data is going to run. It doesn't give you the chance to really have a meaningful connectivity. So that's why we've come out with the standard, and we are really pushing hard. And we do understand that it's going to take a while for countries to get there, but every country is very different. And making sure that you also have the right devices, like at least a basic smartphone. This is basic, but we are hoping that people can have laptop, tablets, and afford them as well. So that is why we came up with a standard called the Meaningful Connectivity Standard, which is raising the bar about connectivity. And some people are thinking it's too ambitious, but I think that with time, everybody's going to realize that it's very important.
Well, can there ever be enough? I mean, this is not at the same time you're helping there where the lack is, where the water doesn't arrive. On the other hand, doesn't this somehow also imply like a technological race and also an economic race? Like more and more?
Well, it depends. I think that what I see is that we will get to a stage where we want to get to a stage, and that's why the UN broadband and the UN has this 2030 target for universal access. Universal means that at least everybody up from the age of 10 who can get access to, should be able to get access to some kind of affordable internet, right? So that's what we mean by universal. And so it is going to take time. We are just 10 years away from 2030. So, but every country is at a different level. And back to your question about, yes, would it take, is there a race? There's a race for technology, really. While some countries are at 5G, some countries are still roaming around 2G. And even within some countries, you talked about your town, Sabrina. Some people would be at 5G, maybe at another part, and another place they just have 0G, so you just need to make sure that that's where policy can address some of these issues that, where, policy and regulations, you can say, look, why don't we try and evenly distribute and make it perhaps more economically beneficial for everyone if we can give you a certain incentive, like we give you a carrot, maybe we'll roll back on taxes, maybe we'll give you, ability to import your equipment for free, so that in exchange you go into certain areas. Or we have a fund, we could have a fund or some kind of investment model where it will make it easier for people, for companies to want to connect to some, say, a refugee community or a marginalized community, or some communities somewhere which frankly don't make much money, but they are also very important.
Maybe you have an example. Maybe you have an example where one of your cases in the recent times led to an interesting or a good result.
Oh yes. So we've been working in different regions. So I'll give an example where we worked in Ghana, for instance. Ghana had a situation where there were taxes on handsets. So handsets, that's phone devices, were considered luxury items. So they had about 20% tax, customs tax on them. And one of the, we started an advocacy to say, look, this is the window to getting the internet now, or the window at the door. And so if it's too expensive, then people cannot access the internet. So why don't you, think about rolling back on the taxes? And so we did a research with the local industry group called the Telecoms Chamber, and we were able to get a rollback of taxes. I think roll back about 10% of the tax. The last component had to do with a regional tax that they needed to, called ECOWAS tax, that they needed to discuss. But at least that saw a reduction in the cost of handsets. We've seen this happen in Kenya as well, and advocacy is just continuing. And today's research that we released just shows that there's a lot more work that we need to do. But yes, the advocacy does work. If you show the evidence and you get a good champion in a country, you can do something positive. You can. I see you're smiling, Tino. Are you very happy with that response?
I'm smiling because I'm always asking and talking, and the others cannot intervene, and then I'm like hesitating a second to see if the connectivity works.
Yeah, they're not frozen. No, but
Dominic,
yeah.
you are working with refugees. I also today I had school with refugees, and I see that most of them have a mobile phone, but only a part of them have a laptop, which is a disadvantage if you have to learn a language. But maybe from the other side. So Eleanor is talking from the provider side and the infrastructure. But maybe you, with the students you work, you can say what essential needs are there and where they have problems. That would then be the other end of the line.
Yes, I was just also holding myself back before, so the other guys so everyone's got a chance. So I think we were all just being being too polite. Yes, but no, I mean, of course, this last mile thing is always such a big issue, and so my experience also when I was in West Africa is that many people they had a mobile phone, a smartphone, but they were buying minutes in the internet. So very often they would say, okay, I've got 15 minutes and this is the time I've got to go into the internet and pick something up. So one thing we've been working on at Kiron is to try and think of how can we make part of the courses then available offline. We can do that already with the app we have, but we want to work on it more. So it really would be the case that you could go kind of briefly online, pick something up. The app would be storing all of your activities, and then as soon as it gets a chance to go back online, then it can update kind of the server side. But of course, we all know that we basically have the two kind of concurrent challenges, and the one is access to the internet and the second one is access to smartphones, because many people have access through mobile phones, but many of these mobile phones are feature phones, and this, I think, is one of the big challenges. And I'm interested to see in some countries, and I've seen in Africa, a number of countries, they're trying to produce their own mobile phones in a hope to try and bring the price down a bit. So I don't know if this was also part of the study you did, Eleanor, when to look at those different markets, because that would seem to be a way also to get away from the luxury tax issue.
Yeah, we actually we are going to be looking at it in the next phase of this research. We had wanted to, but the scope just started getting too wide. So in the next phase of the research, we're going to compare if you were to develop the smartphones in your country or manufacture the smartphone in your country, would that be cheaper than it's importing? And yeah, so then I'll be able to give you a better response, which is grounded on research. Yeah.
What I was, oh, sorry, no, Sabrina, go on.
No, I didn't want to be polite.
Exactly.
Stop being
Go
polite,
on.
guys. Stop being polite.
No, but just quickly jumping in there, because I mean, you can't only produce the phones in your country, you can also build the tech in your country, right? So I don't know, like, do you have any data, or just also maybe from your experience? I would be so interested. Like now, for example, Nigeria, I think, right? It's becoming one of the tech hubs, and there's more and more, I would say, like, startup ecosystems coming up as well, and they obviously, like, they know the situation in their home countries, so they would build platforms, even like learning platforms, but also any other kind of technical service, maybe in a very different way. Do you think that will also like change and improve the conditions a bit?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the content. So we've talked about the supply side. The other issue is about what kind of content is relevant, and what format is the content in, and how beneficial is the content, because that was also going to, if people are going to use the internet and you put in all this investment, they should find it useful. So we've seen that in a lot of regions. You mentioned Nigeria. India is another place where we see a lot of activity. Mexico as well. And Brazil, very great innovations that are coming up from hubs. But the point is that we still have a huge usage of apps coming from Europe, and a lot from the US. It's still, first of all, they are easier to use. Number two, they might already come installed on a smartphone, so it's the tendency for you to want to go to that, to use that, is much easier. So there's the issues we need to talk about. First, the development sector, developing apps, how to monetize that, the kind of agreements they need to go between them and some of the telecoms companies, so that the developers can also reap the benefits of their innovations. That's another issue. And when I worked in the telecoms, sector, this was one of the problems we had with local developers, because they talk about the pricing. If you're going to host your innovation on a platform, there has to be some kind of revenue share or revenue split. And often the innovators and the developers were at the back, on the back footing, because the telecoms company or the apps, the bigger platform companies tend to have the upper hand. They have the best lawyers, they have the wealth. So there's that kind of power imbalance, and it's not even peculiar to developing regions. You see that also coming through in some of the big platform companies and the app developers. So we need to have a fairer system, and some of these can be resolved through maybe good policies. I'm hesitant to talk about regulations, because in innovation space, the innovators and the innovations are moving faster than the regulations. So sometimes regulators don't really understand how the space works. The whole digital space is very confusing. the fact that you're even going across jurisdictions, a company sitting in the US and people are using its services in your country, and it gets really confusing sometimes. So I think that it needs a collaborative approach, the better understanding maybe from private sector, trying to educate a lot more of these policymakers, and then perhaps a fairer system, which I don't have the answers right now, but a fairer system to reward developers so that if they can also come up with relevant content that they can also monetize, that'll be good.
Just to pick up on both what Sabrina said and before what Tino said, I was reading something recently which is to do with, if you now go on the Google search page, if you went on there 10 years ago, there was very, very little code on there, and it really was just one little text box basically where you would put a file in, or you put in a search term and something would come up. And now there's masses of code behind that. And I tried it myself actually on a Raspberry Pi to see if you could go on that page with a very, very simple computer. And basically, just simply, many of the things we've got in the internet now require masses of data to actually be working. So is there an argument building on this for kind of trying to support more frugal apps which are just, you know, much more they use much less resources in terms of all this kind of data they're trying to grab? I mean, we also know that much of that data probably isn't being used at the moment.
It's it's a bit of a difficult question. I don't know about frugal apps, because I always say that it's people who are in low bandwidth areas would also like to go on sophisticated apps. And we've seen that in some of the basic, in places where you have, say, the basic, like Facebook basics or some basic or stripped down version of the internet. Our research shows that when those people get the chance to have an internet that doesn't give them, walled gardens, that gives them a chance to go to other sites, they would rather prefer that. So it's all about giving people the content that they want. So and having a frugal internet to say, okay, if you're in a low bandwidth area, this is what is available to you. I often don't subscribe to that. I feel
no, I wasn't. I agree with you. I wasn't saying that we should have kind of two different types of worlds. Okay. I actually think basically we should generally go back to more efficient, stripped back services on the internet, because they're also using my data, which they don't need to.
They're not paying me for it.
Well, I would like to ask Dominic, sorry, because can't we go a little bit back to economy? I mean, you are so much into the information of this whole system worldwide, and maybe there's Europe now, and then the UK and the US and this competition. And I would like to ask, can you say in the last years how much does connectivity, how is the relevance of connectivity for the economy to strive now, and how decisive is that, and where are certain developments? Is there is Africa now catching up a little bit, or is this a wrong generalization? What are the striking elements of the connectivity economy now? What you observe?
I think that we are in a digital economy now. This is the fourth industrial revolution, as people call it, and so the data is very important during this. Data, information, knowledge, and so in various parts of the world where and in my work, I do work across Asia and Latin America as well. We do see that there's a push towards getting things digitally. Everything is moving on to digital. That's the fastest way to connect, fastest way to get your ideas across. You're able to, there's a lot more cross fertilization of ideas. I'm using a bit of my biology terms, and the ecosystem that we find ourselves in. But the key thing about the one of the downside to this is also the issue about how about the when you talk about the economy, it's about who is benefiting from this data, who is benefiting from this innovation, and is the wealth evenly distributed? And that is where we have a problem, because
well, it isn't. It is not evenly
it
distributed.
is
So
not evenly distributed. So you have a situation. This is the reason why people tend to focus a lot on the big four companies, the Apples, the Googles, the Facebooks, and the Amazons. You know, the what they call it, the GAFA, because they make astronomical money from people from all around the world, but then they pay tax in very few places. And that is the challenge that you have with this knowledge economy, because the knowledge doesn't have borders. People are sitting on Facebook in Bangladesh or sitting on Facebook in Argentina, and they're putting the data on there. They're just populating the data. And then those kind of eyeballs are then taken to other companies, and then they sell them the ads. And it's very difficult for companies now, because I've been in conversations in that the OECD last year, where we're talking about taxation of digital companies, and it's a very, very complex topic, because it's so difficult to start. You want to tax, say, a Facebook in every country. It's going to be very complex. So many different tax authorities, so many configurations. How are you going to do this? How do you prove that the money is originating from the country that you're trying to tax? So it's a very complicated topic, but it's getting to a point where regulators are getting really, really, they say, look, these guys are making so much money. It doesn't help. Today, the Jeff Bezos makes so much billions in one day, and then a regulator gets up. Oh my goodness, I need that money to be able to connect a road, or to connect a village to a road, and this guy is just one person is making so much money. This is the complexity of the the knowledge economy that we find ourselves in. And I don't have an answer to how we're going to resolve it, but again, I think that it's one that collaboration is going to help, really.
Just to can we come back to your 3 different miles, because I thought they were very helpful. You had your the first mile, the middle mile, and the last mile.
Last mile, yeah.
And just to kind of understand, which are the players on each of these 3 kind of layers? Because you said on the last mile, that could be an area where community networks could actually have a good impact. But of course, it means that can only work if the middle mile has been sorted already.
Yes.
The middle mile can only work if the first mile has been sorted. So can you just tell us a little bit about who are the actors in each of these areas?
Right. So in the subsea cable, you have a lot of consortiums. So they tend to be consortiums. They could be different companies. So if you take across from Portugal to South Africa, for instance, if that's across Africa, you can have companies like Orange, MTN. You can have other companies like, I'm trying to remember some of them. Is it Liquid, I believe? But they're different consortiums, so they all come together because it's so expensive to deploy that subsea cable. So they come together, they all chip in money into some kind of fund, and then they're able to lay the subsea cable. And then they hope that this subsea cable lands at different countries. So the countries will have to give the permission. If the country is not interested, the subsea cable will go across. It will bypass the country. So it goes in front of the country, but it doesn't land there.
Wow.
So there's that element that government will also have to bring in some money to be able to land a subsea cable in their country. Now, so the consortiums, different companies, some of them are banks as well, that are involved in that space. And this is a similar thing across from Europe going to Asia, and now we are connecting, I believe, Facebook through a consortium, through the Simba, I think they're calling that Simba subsea cable. And then Google's is called Equano. I think they're connecting the US to
Europe,
to US, I think, to Africa, I believe. The Atlantic is going underneath the Atlantic Ocean. So this is just one set of players. Now, when you land in a country, then you can have the middle mile can be different players as well. There could be different companies that are involved in this space. Sometimes it's some of these same companies who are also in the first mile tend to be in the middle mile. So like an orange can also be there. It could also be a partnership. So if you take a country like Rwanda, where the government is also involved in the middle mile in partnership with a Korean company. So then they are taking that through the middle, and then to a particular hub. And then at the last mile, that's where you see a lot more of the companies that you can recognize, like an EE or like a Vodafone. You can recognize them. In the UK, for instance, you take the UK. A lot of this middle mile is done by BT, which used to be. I know BT has government shareholding. I stand to be corrected. They still have government shareholding, but they do the connection for a lot of the companies. So Virgin and BT and EE all ride on this infrastructure, which is at the back end. So the regulator was forced to separate the infrastructure company from the telecoms company, so that you don't have a situation where BT is undercutting its competitors. So you can have different options. There are different models of how to do this. And then, of course, the last mile is the one that comes to you, the one you see on your phone, typically, or your broadband provider at home, which has both your cable, your Netflix and everything else all put together, bundled together. So there are different versions of various players, but it's one that has so many players. Some players you've never heard their names before, because they will typically not be at the retail end. They'll probably be in the middle, or they'll probably be at the first side. But they're different companies. I think most companies try to avoid, most countries try to avoid giving the power to one company to have the power from end to end, because then it gives them too much power. And that's why some people have a problem with Google and Facebook also going into this space. But as long as you have very good regulation, then that shouldn't be a problem. That's where regulation and good policies can make a difference, so that you ensure that there's competition. When you don't have competition, then you go back to square one, where the internet gets too expensive, or others are not able to connect because you've just killed all the competition. And therefore, you can easily raise your prices, and that's not where we want to be. You need good competition to be able to ensure that prices are kept low.
So I understand we have to cut down taxes at the end of the internet connection, where people need devices and need the connection. We need to put up the taxes very high at the beginning, where
no.
Facebook makes money. These companies.
That's not right. I don't want anyone listening to it, leaving at this point to leave with this. Otherwise, it's going to create problems. No, the point is the taxes have to be reasonable. Okay, taxes have to be reasonable. You need to ask yourself, what's the end goal? If you put all your eggs in one basket, where you're looking at you make the cost of infrastructure too high, guess what? After they have just rolled out that infrastructure, they will not be able to roll out the end, or they'll make it so high and expensive that your people will not be able to benefit, and then you all lose. And this is what's happening in some countries, where the cost of the landing cost was so high that the citizens in the country have not been able to use it, because they just can't afford it. So the thing is to keep the taxes very reasonable, and make sure that it's you always remember why you're doing this. That if more people are able to gain access to the internet and use it beneficially, then you can also see income generated, and probably make some better revenues from that. And taxes maybe from that, yes.
Yeah, so the key thing is, as you say, it's the end goal of having this, what you're calling meaningful connectivity, because once you get that piece, then you get all the benefits you're expecting, including the fact that you would hope to have an invigorated economy, which will then be driving taxes, and then we do move forward, right?
Yes, that's how you should look at it. So, Tino, please, I don't want you to
go. I'm joking, but I mean, I've seen your fantastic website also instructs us about the different political aspects of these questions. So who are the users of your studies, and who can look for the good practices database or the affordable internet access 142? So for whom is this page made, and who should use it?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Governments, companies, civil society. I'll tell you why. Governments, because once they see the good practices, and this is what we use on a basis for all our policy and regulations, we talk about good practices. We don't call it best practices because every situation is very different, and we keep learning. So it's very important to say that. And then you have companies as well. If they can also see it, they can also be able to engage regulators better or policymakers better. And then we also talk about citizens and civil society to also get to know it. So you get to know it. And if you're in a conversation with a government official or someone who has who just had Tino's submission and thinks, wow, let's just do this, you're like, no. You need to look at this research. You need to look at what the good practices are. You need to see why it's very important or counterproductive to increase taxes on infrastructure and other things. And let's look at it holistically and take our time. It's much so everybody. It's for everybody really to be better. To once you're armed with the knowledge and the research, then it's easier for you to get the interest that you need as well.
Well, I don't know. Talking with you is the best antidote against conspiracy theories. I feel so much. No, it's really true. I mean, this COVID-19 times has brought up the fears and the anxiousness, and somehow these conspiracy theories coming up more than before. And we need to be informed, and especially the channels of information need to be free and clear and well, and made in the best possible way. Well, from my side, many thanks for this very interesting conversation. Now, afterwards, I will have the intelligent question that I didn't have while we're talking. But maybe don't know if Dominic or Sabrina want to ask something more. But for the rest, we would say that's the time we usually talk. Dominic, Sabrina, what's your opinion about that?
No, I mean, I just want to say that's usually the perfect endpoint, because we have so many more questions left than what we would have at the beginning of a session. So yeah, I mean, it's super interesting because honestly, I know a bit about it, but I've never looked into the depths of it. So I only know the pain that you can have when you are living in some countries and you're not connected, or it is a very high cost, right? But the reasoning behind it and what that also means for like a new digital economy, I think that's super relevant for any country to think about and to maybe regulate a bit better. Yeah, so very, very interesting. And thanks so much for sharing all that knowledge today.
Yeah,
yes, thanks.
Thank you for having me. And I think just a quick one to mention that whilst we talked a lot about access and meaningful connectivity, it's important to talk about the issues of privacy and rights and also misinformation, because we want people to have a good internet access, but we don't want them to go to a bad internet where the content there is not truthful, where people are being harassed online or being forced to go offline because of issues where they cannot speak freely, or you speak freely, but after that you're not free. So we, it needs to be one that we want to see that it actually gives everybody the chance. We can see the transformative power of the internet, and it benefits everyone, not just some people.
Yeah, well, I would just say thank you very much for your contribution. It was, as Sabrina said, I think we've learned a lot today, and that's always what we want to do. I think we've got lots of questions, and we hope that other people who are listening as well do as well. And it's just really great, I think, to rethink these things that seem kind of like just a natural part of our life, which is, okay, I've got a phone. How is it actually really connected to the internet? How much is it costing me compared to other people? And as Sabrina says, it's always nice as well. I have the same experience when I'm in my village where I live. I can't use my phone. And I always find that very sobering to see that, because if you're in a city, you think that was only something that was happening to you 20 years ago. And this whole point of being this kind of more differentiated view of the whole topic, I think, is important. And of course, I think it's great that you, right at the end now, you've emphasized this whole point of how we can think about digital skills, how we can think of harnessing all of these great opportunities for good, and how it also means that we've extended our lives now into a new kind of digital world, which also means there's a lot of opportunities but also challenges that we have to confront there as well. So thanks very much. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you for having me. Is this going to go, is this live or is this recorded? I'm not sure.
So your question.
But
yes.
also,
I've got commented. Are they saying anything? Is there any comments? You don't
unfiltered.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right then.
No, but I just wanted to add, as long as we are still live, because there's one thing we should mention as well, right? About the current talk season, as we are also going to take a summer break.
Yes. Yes, we're going to. Yes, we're going to take a summer break. Thank you, Sabrina, for thinking of the housekeeping. Yes, this is the penultimate episode in this series. We're going to have one more episode in the final week in August. And the topic there, so that'll be on the 27th of August. And the topic there, because we thought it was a very nice, kind of neat way of tidying up the first series, is to talk about the role of podcasts in education. And so that's a nice way of kind of a bit of a self-reflection for us as well. And,
yes, I know.
and then we'll go back and we'll plan a new series. And I have to say, I've had one or two comments from people who say, we really enjoy this, but you have to think a bit more about improving the quality of the sound and things like this. So this is something we have as our own homework. But the topic for us all the time was to just speak to these fantastic people and just kind of, invigorate new discussions. And Eleanor, I think you did played a great part in that today. Thanks very much.
You're such a charmer, Dominic.
I'm British. What can I do?
That's really